My name is Dr. Alfred Henry Williams, and I was born in New Zealand in 1865. By the early 1890s, I was a junior partner in the medical practice of Dr. Steven in Harrow-on-the-Hill. At this time, Harrow was in the fortunate position of having a cottage hospital, whose facilities local doctors could use. However, its board of managers showed little interest in it, so most of the effort in the upkeep fell to Miss Constance Hewlett, who was in charge of the voluntary helpers who managed the hospital's domestic arrangements. None of the local practicing medical men were on the board. I felt this was a serious deficiency and tried to interest Miss Hewlett in the idea of making changes. It is to her credit that she readily agreed to this. 2 senior doctors were invited to join the board, but in the case of Dr. Steven, he nominated me in his place. Having got onto the board, I then persuaded the meeting of subscribers, regular contributors to the hospital funds, to pass a rule accepting the presence of 2 of the medical men of Harrow on the board as a permanent feature. From a medical point of view, the then building on Lower Road was dreadful housing for a hospital. The wards were small, inconvenient, and spread over 3 floors. The staircase was steep, narrow, and winding, making it impossible to carry patients to the upper floors in safety or comfort. The operating room was situated between one of the female wards and the mortuary and post-mortem room. Patients for operation, male or female, had to be carried through the female ward. The operating table was a simple deal table, which could not be considered surgically sterile. The other fittings of the room were of no higher standard. The WC for males was in a cupboard under the staircase in the middle of the hall on the ground floor. Reasonably good bathing and washing arrangements were non-existent. Yet, with all its faults, an astonishing amount of excellent work was done in this old building. However, to achieve this, an enormous strain was put upon the nurse in charge, Sister Peake, and the other nurses who worked there. Some of the defects could have been corrected, but the gross faults could only be remedied by a new building. In my report to the managers' meeting in January 1902, I stated that no further expenditure should go towards modifying the existing building. A new build was what was required. But they were a conservative group, attached to the existing building, and it was only with the active support of other medical men that after 2 years the managers reluctantly agreed to submit a plan to build new wards on the existing site. At the subscribers' meeting in 1904, I again argued that a new building on a new site. The meeting ended with agreement to start raising funds, either for new wards or a new hospital on a new site. The managers then decided to form a committee to find a new site, rather than start raising funds, which seemed to me the wrong way around. 1 year of fruitless searching followed. I had been appointed the secretary of the site committee, so had to make a report to the next subscribers' meeting. On the morning of that meeting, I went to the bank and opened a Harrow Cottage Hospital Building Fund account with a cheque of my own. I could then honestly tell the meeting that there was now money in a building account. I then got the meeting to agree that we could accept further contributions to the account. From that time on, my great object in life was the collection of funds and the building of a new hospital. I must have made myself a horrible nuisance to all my acquaintances. I waylaid them wherever I met them, and gave them no peace until I had extracted from each such a promise as I thought commensurate with their means, or till I was convinced that I could get no more. My practice must have suffered, but the excitement of the chase was stimulating, and the object and result justified the trouble. Some of my victims were not easy fish to land. One gentleman, who I knew to be very well, even very richly endowed with this world's goods, I hoped to tap for a good 3-figure contribution, but I could make no impression on him. I was so persistent that if he saw me in the street, he would dive into the nearest house to avoid me. One day I met him face to face at a corner, and he could not escape. I pleaded that he had been connected with the original cottage hospital and had lived in Harrow many years. I could not allow the first list of subscribers to be published without his name amongst the leading contributors. He asked me what others had given, and I gave him the names of many of his friends, with amounts ranging from £50 to £250. At last I extracted from him a miserable 20 guineas, and had to be content with that. Another old friend, I could never get to the point of committing himself. Every time he would put me off with an excuse that I was doing splendidly. But one day his wife, who was far more sympathetic, told me to tackle him at once, as he had just completed a very lucrative stroke of business. I got £50, but his wife told me that if I had been a little more firm, I could have got £100. Though the bulk of this personal canvassing for funds fell on me, the other doctors were by no means idle. They secured many contributions from those whom they were better able to influence than I. Other notable contributions to the fund were from a garden sale in June 1905, which brought in over £400, while over £100 was raised at the ceremonial laying of the foundation stone on the new site. Then, in December 1906, a bazaar was held in the completed building before it was furnished as the hospital. This realised another £650. Having previously unsuccessfully searched for a site without money in hand, the situation was a different proposition in 1905. We were offered a number of different sites. Would have preferred one on level ground, but those we saw were too small or too expensive. I was strongly opposed to acquiring a site of less than an acre. We had to allow for possible further development. We eventually acquired a site of 1.5 acres on Roxeth Hill. After the acquisition, strong pressure was brought on the committee to sell half the land and recoup some of the outlay. However, I argued that the time would come when we should need all the land we had secured for further extensions, as the population of Harrow would only continue to grow. I was allowed to have my way. In order that the excess land might not appear to be lying wasted, I obtained a number of fruit trees, and with these planted an orchard. Subsequent developments at the hospital show that my determination to keep the whole of the site was a wise one. Finally, I returned to the subject of the new hospital building. In early June 1905, the size of our fund was so satisfactory that the committee felt justified in sending suggestions to the architect. These had been obtained from the medical practitioners of Harrow, along with a rough sketch plan of the arrangement that had been drawn up by Sister Peake and myself. The committee asked the architect to prepare plans for a building costing about £5,000 which would include as many as possible of the suggestions made.